Negative team.
Yes.
Grayson? Yeah. All right. Well, in this second affirmative speech of today's debate round, I'm going to be going first off through the negative team's disadvantages, and then their counter plan, showing how, first off, our plan is the best way to vote in today's debate round, and secondly, how the negative team's counter plan will only hurt the United States economy and lose lives in the process and not help us. Let's go down first off to disadvantage 1 that they brought up of preventing economic growth. Now, their first sub-point was that the corporate tax affects prices. Now, I'd like to bring up a few responses to this. My first response is that that's because it is so high. Because it is so high. The reason that the corporate tax right now is trickling down to prices is because the corporate tax is so high that the businesses can't afford to just pay that 35% out of their salary. So that's why they pass some of that cost down to consumers through increased prices, because they don't have the ability to be able to pay the 35% of their profits every single year. That's a huge chunk out of their profits. They don't have that ability. That's why the prices go down. So this logically leads to my second response of a tax cut reduces prices. A tax cut reduces prices. If the reason that a corporation increases prices is because of a high rate, then logically a tax cut will reduce prices for a corporation. Because given they're paying less money to the government, they're able to hire more, and they're able to reduce prices, and they're able to increase wages. That helps the economy. My third and final response is increased wages. Increased wages. Now, a tax cut for corporations to 25% will have a massive effect on wages. Karen Campbell, PhD in economics, said in 2010, quote, about a corporate tax rate cut to 25%. A typical family of four's after-tax income would rise on average by $2,484 per year, end quote. So the negative team talked a lot about consumer spending under here, but the affirmative team accesses consumer spending. We are able to increase consumer spending because we give people more money. We'll be seeing a bit later how the negative team, in fact, decreases consumer spending through one of the disadvantages. We've seen so far, though, that the affirmative team, in increasing wages for employees of corporations, they're able to spend more money, and that means that consumer spending is increased. As the negative team so adequately said in their speech, that is 70% of the economy. So when consumer spending increases, the economy increases. Our plan does that. So let's go down now to their point about consumer spending, and we're going to be looking at two reasons why the affirmative team increases consumer spending. Reason one is because of wages. Wages. We just talked about this. We increase wages, so people spend more money. That's simply logical. The second reason is because of the deficit reduced. The deficit reduced. Now, my partner made the argument in his first speech that when the deficit is reduced, there's more consumer confidence, people are more confident in the government, so they're more able to freely spend their money in the economy. There's able to be more confidence in spending in the economy. My partner made that argument in his first speech. So given we reduce the deficit, we end up increasing consumer spending in that way. And we'll be seeing later how the negative team increases the deficit. Let's go down to their second disadvantage now, which is of keeping businesses overseas. And I have a simple response of competitive rate. Competitive rate. Now, the reason that our corporations are going overseas right now to places like Ireland isn't because we have a corporate tax rate at all. Almost all huge nations in the world have corporate tax rates. All the big economies have a tax on corporations. The important part is the rate. And the average rate for the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, which is basically, it's an organization for all the big economies, the average tax rate in that organization is 25%. So we reduce our rate to the competitive rate with all those countries so that the businesses won't go overseas anymore. Almost all countries have corporate taxes. The important part is the rate, and we make the rate competitive to bring business back to the United States. Let's go down now to their counter plan now. I'd like to first talk about topicality under the counterplan. Now, basically, first let's look off at the resolution. The resolution says the United States federal government should substantially reform its revenue generation policies. So the negative team argued that because they're abolishing the corporate tax instead of reforming it, that's not topical. However, the resolution doesn't call us to reform the corporate tax. It calls us to reform our entire revenue generation policy. That includes corporate tax, income tax, capital gains tax, estate tax. It includes all of those things. So the negative team is in fact reforming our body of revenue generation policies by abolishing the corporate income tax. Before the counterplan, there is a corporate income tax. After the counterplan, there isn't one. Our revenue generation policy is reformed. So they are topical under the resolution, which means that they're affirming the fact that the United States federal government should reform its revenue generation policies. Thus, they're simply confirming the resolution for the affirmative team, and the affirmative team should win either way. Let's go down now, though, into a couple disadvantages of the negative team's counterplan, seeing how this will only hurt the American people, not help them. We'll start off with disadvantage one of lives lost. lives lost. Now the reason for this is because the corporate tax code has a lot of specific exemptions and credits in it to incentivize certain activities. And one of these activities is researching orphan drugs. And unfortunately, given the negative team abolishes the entire corporate tax, they lose this incentive. Let's take a look at how effective this incentive is being. The Food and Drug Administration said in February of 2009, quote, "The Orphan Drug Act means hope for more than 25 million Americans who currently have one of 7,000 rare diseases. More than 300 orphan products for treatments of rare diseases have been approved by FDA since this groundbreaking legislation went into effect. In the decade before it was passed, only 10 had been developed," end quote. So if we do the math, without this drug credit, about 1 drug was approved each year. But with the credit, 20 have been approved each year. So there is a massive amount of orphan drugs, more effective medicine being approved because of this credit. The reason for this is because without the credit, without this tax credit, the development of these drugs simply doesn't give a profit to the corporations. This was confirmed by the United States Chamber of Commerce in 2009 when they said, quote, "The orphan drug credit is designed to encourage the development of drugs for rare diseases and conditions. Drug development would otherwise be economically unfeasible," end quote. So without this credit, corporations simply don't have incentives to produce these drugs. Let's take a look at how important these drugs are. Cardinal Health, a Fortune 500 healthcare services company, said in 2006, quote, "It is estimated that 1 new orphan drug saves approximately 211 lives per year," end quote. So the negative team abolishes a tax credit that has led to 19 more drugs per year being approved, and each one of those 19 drugs saves 211 lives per year. If we do the math, that means that each year, because of the orphan drug credit, we save about 2,300 lives because of these effective diseases that our corporate tax code incentivizes businesses to invest in. The negative team removes that incentive, which means that these corporations will stop making those drugs, which means that those lives will be lost because there won't be medicine for the people. And this should be considered before any argument in today's debate around given lives should certainly come before the economy. Let's go down now, though, to how the negative team negatively affects the economy as well as lives, with disadvantage 2 of deficit increased. Deficit increased. Robert Carroll, PhD in economics, said in February of 2010, quote, "Under normal economic circumstances, the corporate income tax raises roughly $350 billion per year," end quote. So basically, what that piece of evidence is showing us is just the numbers. The corporate tax code raises about $350 billion per year. Now, the problem with this is that in losing all this revenue each year, the negative team increased the deficit of the United States federal government. And as we already saw, when you reduce the deficit, you increase consumer spending. But when you increase the deficit, people are less confident in the government and they do less spending. That means that if we're talking about who has the most economic growth, because of the 70% of the economy being consumer spending, the negative team reduces that spending because they decrease confidence in the government by increasing our budget deficit. They increase the discrepancy between how much we spend and how much we earn, which will only lead to people spending less and being less confident in the government. My final response, let's go to the reason 3 of remove complexity. My response to this is net gain. Net gain. It costs about $160 billion for corporations and people to claim tax credits per year, but it's about $1 trillion of benefit to the economy every single year. So these tax credits are actually a net gain to the economy. So we see that in the end, the counterplan is topical, so they're essentially affirming the resolution. It's not a good idea because it loses lives and hurts the economy, and the affirmative team is a much better solution to the problems we presented. Thank you.
Nice to begin. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Doing very well. Got a couple questions for you.
All right.
Looking at disadvantage 2, your first response was that of a competitive rate, correct?
Yes.
So how is the affirmative team's plan of introducing a 25% tax rate on large corporations going to be competitive when other countries have no corporate tax at all?
Well, the countries that have no corporate tax at all are called tax havens. Those countries, they're not big economies. They don't have the business appeal that the United States does because they don't have the kind of consumer spending.
Did you ever respond to the empirics that we brought up in the last speech of Estonia, where the business actually increased 4 times after they abolished corporate tax?
You can't compare the economy of Estonia to the economy of the United States.
Did you ever make that argument in your speech?
I didn't make that argument in my speech,
Okay,
but
yeah.
you just simply can't compare the size of the economies.
Did you ever give any counter empirics?
Counter-empirics. I didn't talk about specifically how this has worked in the past, but we did look at evidence from experts about how reducing the rate to 25% will help our economy.
Okay, but once again, if I'm a corporation, say I own Apple Corporation, and I see the United States where you're putting a 25% tax on me, and I see countries like Ireland or Estonia that have 0 corporate tax rate, why would I ever choose the United States over another country?
First off, Ireland does not have a 0% corporate tax rate.
Estonia.
Okay, Estonia. You choose the United States because we have a much stronger economy with much more consumer spending.
But if I can make the products in another country and still sell them in the United States and get consumer spending, why would I not do that?
Well, in order for that to happen, most corporations do something like that. They'll be headquartered in the United States, make the products overseas, and then bring them back to the United States. But they're still headquartered in the United States, so they're still filing taxes.
But the
to us.
jobs are actually happening in another country.
No,
correct?
they still happen in the United States because there's still innovation, and there's much more potential for growth in the economy in the United States than in smaller economies like Estonia.
Did you have any corporations that actually said that under your plan they would go to your country, not another country with a lower tax rate?
Yes, my partner had evidence in his first speech that by getting rid of the repatriation tax, 44 corporations would be bringing their money back to the United States.
Now, was that from the corporations, or was that from a governmental analysis or another study?
It was from a lobbying force that they signed a letter that was signed by those 44 corporations. So it was effectively the corporations saying it.
Okay.
It was 44 of the corporations that have some of the most cash overseas.
Okay, now moving on down to your response to the reason to prefer number 3 of removing complexity. Now, you talked about the tax credits. Well, where in our evidence did it ever mention a tax credit?
Well, that's where the complexity comes from, is the different tax subsidies in the tax code.
Our evidence was not saying that's where the complexity comes from. Our evidence was saying that the fact that they have to hire tax lawyers to find out how much their corporations owe in corporate taxes, that's where the complexity is. So how does the counterplan, or how does your plan solve for that?
My argument was that the complexity it's not complex, it's a net gain to the economy because as I said, corporations spend about $100 billion filing for those exemptions, and it's a net gain of about $1 trillion to the economy.
So what's better, for the company to have to pay taxes with exemptions or no taxes at all? What's better for the corporation?
My point is that it's not a problem right now, so it should be disregarded. Okay. We should look at which team helps the economy.
Okay, but to bring you back to my question, what's better for the corporation, no taxes or taxes with exemptions?
What I believe is better for corporations is people spending more money, which only happens under our plan.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
Thank you.